Amelia Warner announces she will forgive Jamie Dornan, because every child needs a father. The voice is full of emotion and salvation, quiet, deep, human. The morning Amelia decides, really decides, to forgive him, London is a gentle, rain-soaked grey. The grey softens everything. The sound of buses, the jingle of bicycle bells, the rustle of motorbikes in the steady drizzle. She watches the scene from the kitchen window, her palm clutching a cup that has long gone cold. The house is quiet, too quiet, because the girls had slept at her mother's the night before, and silence always deepens the pain. The headline lies face down on the table. She doesn't need to turn around to know what it says. She doesn't need the jostling of strangers to define the pain, or what's left of it. She had lived in the whisper of judgment for months, each new article a flint against the glass of an already fragile room. But this morning's silence was different. It wasn't empty. It was filled with anticipation, like a theater before the lights come up for a scene you've been dreading. Amelia took a deep breath, as if opening a locked door, then another, and then she said aloud, "No audience, no mirror, just the steam on the windows and the sound of rain. I will forgive him." Her voice surprised even herself, the steadiness in it. Because all children need a father. The statement didn't excuse anything. It didn't soften the sharp edges or reshape the story into something neater. It simply articulated a truth she knew deep down. That love, for the children she carried, for the home they had built, for the man who both sustained and wounded her, was a complicated terrain. And if she wanted to navigate it properly, she would have to learn both the language of boundaries and the syntax of compassion. The room where the air was thin. When she told her therapist, the woman tilted her head and waited, the practiced hush of a person who had learned to let other people fill silence. The office smelled faintly of peppermint tea and clean paper. A raincoat dripped politely behind the door. "Say it again," the therapist said, not a command, but an invitation. "I will forgive him," Amelia repeated. Because all children need a father. Not a visiting ghost, not a silhouette that walks in and out when the scandal thins and the lights dim. A father. One with hands that hold, with eyes that see. One who reads the same story 3 nights in a row because the youngest insists that the dragon isn't scary anymore. One who shows up for the small things without needing to be congratulated. The therapist nodded, a small, steady movement. "Forgiveness," she said softly. "What does it mean for you?" "It doesn't mean I forget," Amelia said. "It doesn't mean I pretend I was never angry or that my stomach didn't harder than rock each time a new headline found me. It doesn't mean the world can write whatever story it wants and I will stand there, smiling, like a mannequin with a heartbeat. What does it mean, then? It means I choose the life I value over the noise I cannot control. It means I choose to be the mother I promised myself I'd be, before I ever became a wife. It means I will not hand my children a house built on knives." She swallowed. "It means I do not confuse punishment with protection." The therapist's pen hovered. "And what do you need from him, for forgiveness to be real?" Amelia looked at the window. Consistent goodness. Not grand gestures. The kind of ordinary that lasts. The letter in the drawer. There was a letter she had kept in the top drawer of her nightstand, folded so many times the paper wore pale along the creases. He had written it the week the storm began, ink darker in some places where his hand had pressed harder. "I don't know how to repair what other people break, but I know how to hold what is ours. I know how to stay, even when I'm clumsy and afraid. I am your imperfect man and their imperfect father, and maybe that is the only honest thing to be. If love can survive honesty, then perhaps we can still make a home inside it." She had read it the way some people read scripture, not for information, but for oxygen. When the girls were asleep and the house settled into its night sounds, the boiler ticking, the old stairs stretching their bones, the fox in the garden investigating a forgotten ball, she would take out the letter and press it smooth on her lap. Not to absolve him, to remember that the world was not binary, that people could wound and be worthy in the same breath. That complexity wasn't betrayal, even if the internet insisted it was. Sometimes, forgiveness is not a sunrise but a series of small lamps you light each evening. This letter was one of hers. How children speak the most true things. On a Saturday filled with the smell of baked bread and wet wool, the oldest sister asked a question she had been pondering for weeks. They were drawing, Amelia, a poor but spirited house, her daughter, a cat in a crown, the youngest, a bright pink-like flower. "Hey, Mom," the oldest sister said, her head bent over her green crayon, "how are you and Dad?" Amelia looked at the cat's crown and then at the little girl with the crayon. She remembered her therapist's advice. Answer the question that was asked, not the one you were afraid of. "Dad and I have had a hard time," she said slowly. "Sometimes adults do too. We're learning to be kinder and braver at the same time." "Are you still married?" the youngest asked immediately. Her mouth was purple from the frosting on the cupcake. "Yes," Amelia said, smiling. "We're still married." "So, is Daddy in trouble?" whispered the oldest, for she was old enough to hear playground whispers in adult voices. "He's learning, like all of us," Amelia said softly. "And we'll keep learning together." The oldest nodded like a judge whose verdict pleased her. "Okay, because Daddy's funny when he dances." The youngest nodded too. "And he reads books about dragons the way dragons do." Amelia's chest gave the kind of jolt of relief that comes before you're ready. Too big, too fast, beautiful, heavy, and confusing. "Yes," she said, and wanted to cry with gratitude for the way children weave through things that seem torn apart. When he came home, he stood on the front steps a minute longer than necessary. She could see him through the glass, hands deep in his coat pockets, eyes downcast, the rain threatening to drown him. He looked like a man standing outside a church, unsure he was worthy to enter. She opened the door before the bells rang, signaling the need for ceremony. "Hello," he said, and the words were absurd, inadequate to what they had been through. But most beginnings are humble. "Come in," she said, stepping aside. He took off his coat and hesitated. For months, their choreography had been formal. The careful exchange of logistics, the choreography of schedules as a diplomatic dance, the petty courtesies that made the house feel like a museum of politeness. Today, she wanted to change the shape of how they occupied the same space. "The girls will be back after lunch," she said. "I told Mom to keep them for a few more hours." He nodded. "Okay." They went into the kitchen because that's where you go when your heart needs to be soothed. He offered to make tea, and she agreed. Watching his hands find the right cupboard was like watching a bird fly back to a branch it had almost forgotten. When he put down his cup, he didn't sit down. He began, but the sentence stumbled over the threshold of his old apology. "I know," she said. "I know what you're sorry for. I know who I am. I know what the world is." She gripped her cup. "I know this too. I will forgive you." He didn't move. A muscle in his jaw quivered, a man trying to process the words he wanted but didn't expect. "Why?" She breathed out the truth Shed practiced alone in the kitchen. "Because our children need a father. Not in the abstract, in everyday life. And because I don't want to build a life of punishment. I want a better story for them. I want a better story for myself." He nodded, then nodded again, as if his body needed time to catch up. "What does forgiveness look like, Amelia?" he asked softly, "so I don't confuse it with permission." Her lips curved, not a smile, but something more solid. "It looks like you're showing up. It looks like repair doesn't need an audience. It looks like boundaries we agree on, not walls we use as weapons. It looks like you're remembering that love isn't a performance for people to clap for the wrong reasons." He closed his eyes for a second, the way a man does when a doctor presses on a bruise and the pain gives way to relief at finally naming it. "I can do it," he whispered. "I want to do it." "Wanting is not the same as doing," she said, not unkindly. "We'll see if they're the same thing." He sat down then, and the kettle boiled again, a normal sound that made something in her chest relax. In the doorway, the house breathed a sigh of relief. The beginning sometimes was just two people agreeing to sit in the same chair, at the same table, with the same patience for their own limitations. Public and the hunger for forgiveness. Private forgiveness is like a garden. Public forgiveness is like a velvet-carpeted battlefield. She knew the calls would come, the requests, the negotiated stories. She could already hear the voice of a public relations professional. If you don't say anything, they'll write it for you. If you say too much, they'll chew it up. But Amelia decided on a third option. Say something true, then leave the room. She wrote it on the kitchen table between getting the school newsletter and the museum pass. Her statement was short and simple. We are a family learning to be a family again. That's work we'll do at our dinner table, not yours. I will forgive the man I married because our children need a father, and because I believe that love is braver when it is a builder than a judge. Please grant our children the kindness of privacy as we practice the common kindness of being present for each other. A.W. She sent it to a few stores she had asked, then turned off her phone. She baked a loaf of banana bread, which came out a little dark at the edges but smelled like a house with the lights on. She watered the dianthus in the hallway, adjusted the knobs on the fireplace, and wiped fingerprints off the back door because rituals of care are a way of telling yourself the story you need to keep going. The world, as expected, was analyzed, debated, and dissected. Some called it holy, some called it absurd, some classified it as women as benevolent doormats, as if mercy meant erasure. But there were also notes, the kind written in the middle of the night by people who had survived their own little wars. Thank you for reminding us that love can be fierce without being loud. Thank you for speaking of simple grace as if it mattered more than show. Thank you for not pretending it was simple, because it wasn't. She didn't answer any of the notes. She carried them, light as a butterfly, to the place inside her that held the lights for the evening, forgiveness harder than it had been this morning. Repair work. Repair is inherently boring. It has to be. Otherwise, it becomes a drama. They start with calendars and end with chores. They learn to argue without arguing, to stop mid-sentence before their mouths do something their hearts can't accept. They practice, awkwardly at first, then with the grace that comes from muscle memory, saying, I'm overwhelmed, can we continue later, and really meaning later, not never. He keeps his promises in ways no camera can. He leaves home early to pick up the kids from school without posting a photo of the tiny backpack. He fixes a hinge that's been creaking for months. He learns to make the soup she craves when the weather changes, and to ask, do you want advice or just tea, before he thought he was the solution to her fatigue. He went to therapy himself and came back with questions instead of excuses. He wrote letters to their daughters the day they wanted to ask difficult questions. He kept them in a wooden box that had once held his childhood treasures. He apologized without exaggeration. He admitted without wallowing in shame. He learned not to defend himself when she needed space to express her feelings. And she, because forgiveness without dignity would have left her speechless, drawn lines she would not let him cross, not even once. She did not punish him with coldness, nor did she punish herself with superficial indifference. She practiced holding two truths at once, this pain and we are healing. Their home did not become a sanctuary of happiness. There were still cranky mornings, too little sleep nights, and the crushing exhaustion that came from raising children in a world that was constantly calling. But woven through the daily squabbles was a new thread, a silent vow kept in 1,000 little ways. What children know about rain? The day the girls came home with paper crowns from a school project, the sky opened up merrily and threw everything into chaos. They squealed with delight as they rushed through the door, boots thumping, coats fluttering, hallways as clean as if welcoming childhood. He knelt down to pluck a crown from damp hair while Amelia warmed towels on the stove. The youngest girl, completely sincere, asked if dragons were afraid of rain. He answered solemnly that dragons liked all weather because they made their own warmth. The eldest sister bragged that she had drawn a castle with doors that never locked and a moat full of friendly fish who delivered letters. He asked if the fish needed stamps. She said yes, but only glitter stamps. The scene was not cinematic, but the moment seared itself into Amelia's soul. She looked at them in the doorway, the father, the crowns, the towels waiting to swallow them, and felt the pain change from raw to tender. Forgiveness is sometimes the realization that your body has given up. That night, as they lay in the quiet after a bout of chaos, she said to him, "I'm afraid our children will learn fear from us." "What about now?" he asked. "I think they'll know what to do with it now." The visit. They went to see her mother together. Amelia was very concerned that the bell of forgiveness rang outside the house, that the people who had supported her also got to witness the man learning to stand beside her again. Her mother lived in a house next to a garden that had outlived 3 cats and 2 cherry trees. The kettle was older than their marriage but boiled more reliably than some people liked. Her mother hugged him longer than he deserved and just as he needed. "I'm here because my daughter is generous," he said, his eyes steady. "And because I won't waste what she's building." Her mother looked at Amelia and then at him. "Good," she said, which in her language meant, "I trust you," while still rolling up her sleeves. She asked him if he wanted a cookie. He said, yes. Forgiveness sometimes looked like a butter cookie. The night of the letter. Months later, on a velvety night, Amelia took the letter out of the drawer and read it again. Not because she doubted it, but because the words reminded her of the long journey since that first morning. The page was thinner in her hands. The folds were still there, but not as tight as before. She gently put it back and lay on her side, watching the blue of the digital clock cast a faint glow on the ceiling. He stirred in his sleep, the small, simple sound of someone who trusted in the dark. She reached for his hand under the covers and felt it open. "I forgive you," she whispered, not to wake him, but to bury the truth in the room that had once felt like a stage. "And I forgive myself because it took time." He turned his palm and laced their fingers together, the way he often did when the world shrank to the size of a bed and the breath between them. She thought of their girls, of crowns and mermaid armor and the warmth of dragons. Of calendars with circled school plays and a hinge that no longer complained. Of tea without speeches and soup without forgiveness. Long, ordinary days that piled up like bricks until they became a solid wall. What forgiveness is, and is not. On that morning, at the window that was bright with rain, Amelia had written a page in her notebook of truths she didn't want the world to change. She wrote it not as a manifesto, but as a map in case she got lost again. Forgiveness isn't forgetting. It isn't covering a wound with lace and calling it healed just because it looked pretty from afar. It is not about looking saintly before an audience whose attention is a dubious currency. It is not about erasing anger. It is not about abandoning sanity. It is not about the absence of grief. Forgiveness is about taking the long road because the short road has tricked you into a vicious circle. It is about asking for correction and accepting it when it comes clearly, without any design. It is about protecting children from the drama of adult pride. It is about being patient with evidence. It is about practicing stubbornly believing that people are more than the worst they have done in the most difficult times of their lives. Forgiveness is not a favor to him. It is a promise to the life I am building, with my children, with my own sanity. It is refusing to surrender my home to the desires of strangers. It was love as architecture, not as spectacle. She closed the notebook and placed it on the shelf above the kettle, where she kept recipes, stamps, and spare batteries for the fairy lights in her daughter's room. An ancestral altar, unremarkable to anyone else, but sacred to her. The final scene without applause. There will be other storms, for such is the nature of the weather and life demands order. But the house is still solid beneath their feet. When the girls climb onto their laps with picture books, they blend perfectly into the space, their laughter echoing around the edges of the once echoing room. When quarrels come, they take shorter walks and land more softly. When joy comes, it wears pajamas. On a Sunday evening filled with the smell of roast chicken and rosemary, they eat too many potatoes and argue amicably about whether a dragon can deliver mail without a thumb. The eldest brother declares a rule that any creature who can read can stamp. The youngest falls asleep on his shoulder before dessert. Amelia watches them and thinks, this is not victory. This is the quiet reward of repair. Then he washed the dishes and stacked them like a man who had learned to trust gravity again. She dried them. The night tapped patient fingers on the window. The city breathed. Somewhere, the headlines changed to news of fresher meat. Inside, they practiced the ancient art of saving. He handed her the last plate and paused, the water glistening like a new item on his wrist. Thank you, he said, and she heard the years in it. For what? For not mistaking my regret for my death, he said. For giving our child a father who had to earn his own living and did. For choosing us. She set the dishcloth down and touched his cheek, not as a ritual but as an answer. For choosing me too, she said. Every day, without applause. They turned off the lights, the house returned to its true dimensions. Not a stage, not a courtroom, not a radio. A house. The hallway lights hummed. A book about dragons lay obediently on the nightstand, waiting for tomorrow. In the once thin room, the air was now normal, or rather, full. And as she lay beside him, the window blowing a square slice of London's faithful grey into the room, she thought again of the words that had opened this new chapter. Not a spell, not a crack, but a vow that could bear weight without breaking. I will forgive him, because all children need a father. Outside, the rain found the gutters, the garden, and the streetlights, endlessly patient in its work of washing. Inside, a mother unfazed by the sight and a father who has learned the humility of repair, guarding the sleep of two little souls who believe, correctly, that dragons love all weathers and that fish can deliver mail if the stamps sparkle enough. Forgiveness, Amelia now understands, is not a magic trick that makes hurt disappear. It is the art of turning pain into shelter. It is bread, tea, clean towels, and rooms where voices stop because the people in them have decided to stay. Like rain, it is a silence that changes everything it touches, every simple, faithful drop.